The afternoon sun beat down on the old airfield, its heat shimmering across the cracked tarmac. The rhythmic hum of distant jet engines filled the air, a sound that spoke of power, technology, and the future. But amid the sleek gray silhouettes of F-22s and hulking C-5 Galaxies sat a relic of another world, the battered frame of a B-17 Flying Fortress. Its once proud metal skin was dulled by time, streaked with corrosion and peeling paint. Beside it, moving with patient, deliberate care, was Randall Hughes. At 84, Randall's back was slightly bowed, but his hands were steady, guided by a reverence that time could not erode. Each motion, the slow wipe of a rag across the cowling of the engine, the soft click of a wrench against a bolt, was a kind of prayer. His thin white hair peeked out from beneath a faded red cap, and his blue eyes, pale like washed-out sky, reflected something deeper than the present. "Hey, Grandpa, you sure you're allowed to be here?" A young voice called out, slicing through the stillness. Randall didn't look up. He had heard that tone before, a mix of arrogance and ignorance. 3 young airmen had crossed the flight line during their break, curiosity and mischief pulling them toward the strange sight of an old man tinkering with a museum piece. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered staff sergeant named Gallo, smirked as he kicked the thick, cracked tire of the bomber. "You think you can bring this rust bucket back to life with a wrench and a prayer?" His 2 companions laughed. The sound echoed harshly against the metal fuselage. They circled the plane, scuffing their boots against the ground. Pointing at the faded nose art, barely visible on the front, a painted woman with a defiant expression and the words "endless misery" curling beneath her in chipped paint. "Endless misery, huh? Fitting name," one of them sneered. "It's miserable just looking at it." Randall's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He kept his hands busy, tightening a bolt, running a finger along the smooth curve of the propeller housing. Every sound, the distant jets, the crunch of boots, faded behind the hum of memory. He had spent his life with machines like this. Each dent, each scar of metal was a story. To the airman, he was just a stubborn old man wasting his time. To Randall, this was sacred ground. He wasn't restoring a plane. He was resurrecting ghosts. Gallo, irritated by his silence, stepped in front of him. "I'm talking to you, old man. Let's see your authorization. Who said you could be out here?" Randall finally set down his wrench. He reached slowly into the pocket of his overalls and pulled out a worn leather wallet. The edges were soft, frayed from years of use. Inside was a laminated pass from the base commander, granting him access to the historic flight line. Gallo snatched it, squinting at the photo and then back at Randall. "This just says you can be here. It doesn't say you can play mechanic. This is a government asset, not your backyard workshop." Randall met his stare, his voice quiet but steady. "I have permission," he said. "From the base commander himself." The young sergeant laughed sharply. "Sure you do. And I'm the next chief of staff." He flicked the card back into Randall's hand with a smirk. The air around them was heavy with tension. The laughter of the other airmen grew uneasy, sensing the edge in their sergeant's voice. Gallo leaned closer, his tone turning hard. "You need to pack it up, old-timer, before I call security." Still, Randall said nothing. His calm only made them angrier. Then Gallo's eyes caught something. A faded leather jacket draped over a crate nearby. Sewn onto the shoulder was a patch, dark blue, almost gray with age, marked with a silver-winged bullet. Gallo reached out and flicked it with his finger. "What's this supposed to be? Some kind of biker gang emblem?" The touch was light, but to Randall, it hit like a hammer. For a split second, the sunlit airfield dissolved. The sharp smell of jet fuel became the bitter cold of high altitude. The steady hum of the tarmac turned into the roar of 4 Cyclone engines. He was 20 years old again, crammed into the waist gunner's position of the endless misery, tracer rounds streaking past the windows like fireflies. "Hang on, Danny," he had shouted once, to the boy with the Ohio accent and the photo of his sweetheart taped to the gun mount. Then the world had exploded in light and sound. The vision faded as quickly as it came, leaving Randall standing once more on the hot tarmac, the echo of war still in his chest. He stared at Gallo, not with anger, but with the deep, haunted eyes of someone who had already seen too much. And for the first time, the young airman hesitated. Something about that gaze, the stillness behind it, felt like standing in front of a storm. The flight line fell silent once again. Only the whisper of the wind moved through the shell of the old bomber, carrying ghosts that refused to be forgotten. The sun was beginning to slip lower over the airfield when Mark Stettler arrived. A civilian volunteer, Mark was one of the few who still believed the old bomber deserved care. He'd met Randall 2 months earlier, drawn by the sight of that stooped figure who worked every day as if he were keeping a promise no one else remembered. Today, as Mark carried a crate of replacement parts toward the hangar, he froze. He saw the 3 young airmen crowding around Randall, their voices rising, sharp with disrespect. Randall stood motionless, like a statue carved from endurance itself. Mark's jaw tightened. He dropped the crate and marched forward. "Hey!" he barked. "What the hell is going on here?" The airmen turned, startled. Gallo's expression shifted quickly to irritation. "This doesn't concern you, civilian." Mark stopped a few feet away, glaring. "The hell it doesn't. That man's working under authorization from the commander himself." Gallo's smirk returned. "Yeah, that's what he says. But we don't take orders from some retired grease monkey and his fan club." Mark's fists clenched, but Randall raised a trembling hand. "It's all right, Mark. Let it be." "No, it's not all right." Mark's voice was tight with anger. "You can't talk to him like that. You don't even know who you're talking to." Gallo laughed. "Sure I do. A cranky old mechanic playing hero with an antique. Why don't you take your friend back to the museum before we—" He stopped mid-sentence as Mark pulled out his phone. "You know what? Let's see what the commander thinks." The airmen exchanged uneasy glances, but Gallo shrugged it off. "Be my guest." Mark's hands shook as he scrolled through his contacts and hit call. The ringtone echoed faintly over the hum of the airstrip. A deep, calm voice answered. "Colonel Evans." "Sir, this is Mark Stettler, civilian volunteer on the restoration project," Mark said quickly. "There's a situation down here on the historic flight line. 3 airmen are harassing Mr. Randall Hughes. They're threatening to remove him from the area." The line went silent. Then, "Did you say Randall Hughes?" "Yes, sir." A pause, long, heavy, the kind that makes the air colder. Colonel Evans' tone changed. "Where exactly are you?" "At the B-17 restoration site, sir." "Stay there. I'm on my way." The call ended. The airmen didn't seem impressed. "You really think calling the boss is gonna scare us?" Gallo sneered. But something in Mark's eyes made even him hesitate. Minutes passed in tense silence. Randall had gone back to his work, quiet and unbothered. Gallo paced, trying to look confident, but every passing second chipped away at his bravado. Then came the sound, the low growl of a Humvee approaching fast. Dust kicked up as the olive-green vehicle rolled to a stop near the hangar. A figure stepped out, tall, in full uniform, the silver eagle of command glinting on his chest. Colonel James Evans was not a man who needed to raise his voice to command a room. Even from a distance, his presence drew the airmen to rigid attention. He walked straight toward them, eyes scanning the scene, the old bomber, the tools, the men, and finally Randall Hughes. When their eyes met, the years fell away. Sergeant Hughes. Evans breathed the name like a revelation. "I'll be damned." Randall straightened slightly, recognition flickering in his tired eyes. "Colonel Evans, you were just a boy when I last saw you." The colonel's face softened. "You remember me?" I remember every crewman who walked these hangars, Randall replied. Especially the ones who came home. Gallo blinked, confusion crossing his face. Wait, Sergeant Hughes? Evans turned sharply toward him. Staff Sergeant Gallo, is it? His voice was quiet but carried steel. Did you lay hands on this man? Mock him? Gallo swallowed. Sir, we didn't. We were just asking for authorization. Evans cut him off with a glare that could have stopped a clock. This man flew 35 combat missions over Europe. Waist Gunner, 401st Bomb Group. He was awarded the Silver Star for keeping his crew alive when their plane was torn apart by flak. That patch you mocked? Those are his combat aircrew wings. You will never speak to him like that again. The words landed like thunder. The other two airmen stiffened, eyes wide. Gallo's bravado shattered completely. Randall stood silent, humility etched into his face. He hadn't wanted this. He didn't crave attention or pity. All he ever wanted was to keep the memory alive, for the men who didn't come back. Colonel Evans took a deep breath and saluted. Sergeant Hughes, it's an honor to have you on my base. Randall hesitated, then slowly returned the salute. An old soldier's gesture, heavy with respect and ghosts. Mark exhaled softly. The air around them felt different now, heavier, sacred. Evans turned to Gallo. You'll report to my office at 0600 tomorrow. Bring your full team. You'll be writing an official apology, and then you'll assist Mr. Hughes with the restoration under his supervision. Am I clear? Yes, sir, Gallo muttered, eyes fixed on the ground. The colonel nodded once, then placed a hand on Randall's shoulder. You keep her going, Sergeant. This base owes you that much, and more. As the Humvee drove away, Mark looked at Randall, who was staring quietly at the bomber's nose art. She's still got fight left in her. Randall murmured. Just like you, Mark said. Randall smiled faintly. No, son. Just like them. And for a moment, the sun seemed to rest gently on the old man's shoulders, as if even the sky remembered. The next morning dawned calm and clear over the airfield. The scent of jet fuel mixed with the faint sweetness of dew as the first rays of sunlight crept across the sleeping hangars. Inside Hangar 12, Randall Hughes was already at work, tightening bolts, brushing dust off the wing, whispering to the old bomber like to an old friend. He didn't expect visitors this early. For years, his mornings had belonged to silence, to the rhythm of wrenches and memories. But that day, footsteps broke the quiet. When he turned, Colonel Evans stood there. No entourage, no guards. Just a man in uniform holding a folder. Morning, Sergeant, Evans said softly. Randall straightened. Colonel. Evans exhaled, looking around at the aircraft. She's a beauty. I remember when my father told me about these birds. Said they carried half the world on their wings. She carried my whole world once, Randall murmured. The colonel nodded, then held out the folder. I owe you an apology, officially and personally. What happened yesterday was unacceptable. Randall shook his head gently. You don't owe me anything, Colonel. They're just boys. They don't remember. Evans's jaw tightened. Then we'll make sure they do. He opened the folder, revealing documents stamped with the Air Force crest. Effective immediately, this restoration project is officially recognized as a historical preservation initiative. You're its chief consultant. Any airman who volunteers here will do so under your direction. Randall blinked, overwhelmed. That's a lot of faith for an old mechanic. It's not faith, Evans said. It's gratitude. Before Randall could respond, the hangar door creaked open again. 3 young airmen stepped in, Gallo leading, looking humbled but determined. He stopped a few paces away, removed his cap, and squared his shoulders. Sir, he began, his voice tight, we've come to apologize. To you, Mr. Hughes. Randall looked at him for a long moment. The anger that might have been there yesterday had already faded. What remained was only understanding and the quiet sorrow of someone who had seen too much. "You were just doing your duty," Randall said. "You thought I didn't belong here. Maybe I didn't. Until now." Gallo lowered his head. "No, sir. You belong more than anyone." Evans watched silently, arms crossed, as Gallo approached the B-17. "If it's all right," Gallo said, "we'd like to help. You can show us how to keep her alive." Randall's eyes softened. "You ever work on radial engines, son?" "Not exactly, sir. Closest I've come is a drone turbine." Randall chuckled. "Then you're about to meet a real machine." He handed Gallo a wrench. It was old, the metal worn smooth from decades of use, but balanced perfectly in the hand. "Treat her like a living thing," Randall said. "She'll teach you patience if you listen." As the young men joined in, the hangar filled with new sounds: laughter, questions, the clink of tools. Dust swirled in golden shafts of morning light, as if the past itself had come alive again. Evans lingered nearby, quietly watching. For years, he had wanted to bridge the distance between generations of soldiers, the ones who fought and the ones who trained in peace. Seeing them together now, shoulder to shoulder, was more powerful than any speech. At one point, Mark Stettler entered, carrying coffee for everyone. "Didn't expect a full crew this early," he joked. Randall smiled faintly. "Guess word got around." By noon, the bomber's left engine had been half reassembled. Gallo wiped grease from his face, grinning despite himself. "She's tougher than she looks," he said. Randall's voice carried quiet pride. "She's still here for a reason." Evans approached, resting a hand on the plane's fuselage. "Sergeant Hughes, we're organizing a Heritage Day next month. I want this beauty ready to roll out. Think you can make that happen?" Randall hesitated, eyes on the aircraft's faded nose art, endless misery, painted by a crewman long gone. "She's got one more story left in her," he said. "Then we'll make sure the world hears it," Evans replied. For the first time in years, Randall felt the weight lift from his chest. The laughter of the young men, the roar of distant engines, even the scent of oil and dust. It all felt alive again. As evening fell, the group stood outside, watching the sun dip behind the wings. Gallo turned to Randall. "Sir, can I ask something?" "Go ahead." "What was it like up there?" Randall looked toward the sky, now calm and painted with crimson streaks. "It was loud, cold, terrifying, but when you're flying with men you trust, it's also the most beautiful thing in the world." Gallo nodded slowly. "I hope I can understand that someday." Randall smiled faintly. "You just did." And for a moment, the hum of the base faded, leaving only the echo of engines that once carried the weight of history across the clouds. A week later, the airfield hummed with quiet anticipation. Hangar 12 had become something sacred, where old ghosts met young hands. Under Randall's patient guidance, the B-17 Endless Misery was finally ready for her first engine test in decades. Randall, wearing his usual blue overalls and a red cap, wiped his hands on a rag. Grease stained his palms and forearms, but his eyes sparkled with something far stronger than fatigue: purpose. Gallo, now far from the arrogant sergeant he'd been, stood beside him. The 27-year-old airman looked focused, his uniform sleeves rolled up, face streaked with sweat and oil. "Ready when you are, sir," he said. Randall chuckled. "Don't call me sir. I work for a living." The group laughed, even Colonel Evans, watching from nearby with a few officers and civilians who had gathered to witness history being reborn. Mark Stettler was recording everything, his phone trembling slightly with excitement. Randall's voice cut through the hum of the moment. "All right, gentlemen, let's wake her up." He moved slowly, reverently, toward the control panel mounted on a rolling cart beside the bomber's nose. Every step echoed memory. The smell of oil and metal brought him back to another lifetime. 1944, freezing air, gunfire. The roar of engines that were both salvation and death. His gnarled hand hovered over the ignition switch. "Magneto's on," he called out. Gallo responded immediately. "Magneto's on. Fuel valves open. Valves open." Randall took a breath so deep it trembled. "Clear prop," he shouted. "Clear prop." The others echoed. Then, with a flick of his wrist, he pressed the starter. For a moment, nothing. Just silence, like the world was holding its breath. Then a deep mechanical cough, another, and then the left engine came alive in a thunderous roar. Smoke burst from the exhaust stacks, swirling around the plane like ghosts being freed. Cheers erupted through the hangar. Mark whooped, Gallo pumped a fist in the air, and even the colonel cracked a rare smile. But Randall, he simply stood still, hand resting on the cold metal, eyes glistening. He wasn't seeing the hangar anymore. He was seeing the past. "Hold her steady, boys." Someone had shouted through static once. The bomber had been riddled with holes, sky burning red around them. His best friend, Captain Doyle, was bleeding beside him. Randall had kept the engines running until the ground appeared through smoke and tears. Now, in the present, his lips moved without sound. A prayer, or maybe a thank you. Gallo approached quietly. "You okay, sir?" Randall blinked back to reality. "Aye, son, just remembering the noise. It's been too quiet all these years." Gallo smiled faintly. "She's singing again." Randall nodded. "She's talking to them. Every one of them." Colonel Evans stepped forward, voice deep but gentle. "Sergeant Hughes, you've just made history again." Randall chuckled. "No, Colonel, just reminding it." As the engine continued to rumble, Evans turned to his officers. "Make sure this is logged. Every second of it." Mark lowered his camera, whispering, "This belongs in a museum." Randall shook his head. "No, Mark, it belongs here. In the sky." The colonel smiled. "Then maybe, if we're lucky, we'll see her fly again." Randall looked at the plane, her silver body gleaming under the late morning sun, propellers spinning with life. His heart swelled with pride, grief, and peace. All at once, for the first time in decades. The airfield sounded the way it used to, alive with the growl of courage and memory. The young airmen stood around the old man, watching, listening, not to the machine, but to what it represented. And in that roaring noise, Randall could almost hear them again, the laughter of his old crew, echoing somewhere between the clouds and time. The sound of boots striking the hangar floor echoed like drumbeats as Colonel Hayes entered. The mechanics froze. The old man, Miriam Carter, a 68-year-old retired Air Force engineer, looked up from under the wing of the half-restored B-17. Sweat clung to his forehead, streaking down the lines carved by years of wind, sun, and war. The colonel's crisp uniform and silver wings glinted under the light. He was a man of precision and presence, and everyone felt it. Hayes stopped in front of the aircraft, eyes tracing the shining rivets, the reassembled propellers, and the patched aluminum skin. His voice was low, measured. "Who did all this work?" No one spoke. The younger airmen, who had spent weeks mocking Carter behind his back, looked anywhere but at the old man. The colonel's gaze found him: bent posture, grease-stained coveralls, trembling hands that still held a wrench like it was an extension of his soul. "You," Hayes said. "You worked on this?" William straightened as best he could. "Yes, sir." "She's almost ready to breathe again." His voice trembled slightly, but his eyes burned with quiet pride. The colonel walked closer, running his hand along the cold fuselage. "You know, I flew one of these in '45. Never thought I'd see one standing again." For a long moment, there was silence. Then Hayes turned to the young men. "Do any of you even know what you're standing next to?" This plane carried heroes. And that man, he pointed at Carter, was one of them. The airman's smirks vanished. Hayes continued, voice rising, filled with restrained anger. He earned those wings before you were even born. The colonel gestured toward Carter's chest, where a small tarnished pin of silver wings was fastened. You should be learning from him, not mocking him. Carter's hands tightened around his wrench, eyes glassy but strong. For the first time in years, he felt seen not as an old relic, but as what he truly was, a guardian of memory and metal. The hangar was utterly silent. Even the distant hum of aircraft engines outside seemed to pause. The colonel nodded once, sharply. Carry on, Sergeant. As Hayes left, one of the young mechanics, barely 22, stepped forward. Mr. Carter. I didn't know. I'm sorry. William gave a faint smile. You couldn't have. But maybe now you will. He turned back to the B-17. The sound of his wrench clinking softly like music, a song of remembrance, of honor reborn. Chapter 6. The Return of Thunder. Following weeks transformed the hangar from a place of mockery to a temple of reverence. Every morning, the young airmen arrived before dawn, waiting for William to open the heavy metal doors. They followed his instructions carefully, now no laughter, no jokes, just the rhythmic clatter of tools and the hum of purpose. The old man no longer worked alone. His steady hands guided theirs, teaching them how to treat every bolt, wire, and rivet like a sacred vow. The B-17, once a skeleton of rust, was becoming whole again. Its engines roared to life for the first time in decades, coughing, then thundering like a heartbeat reborn. The vibrations filled the hangar walls and trembled through the men's bones. Some of them covered their ears. Others smiled, unable to hide their awe. William stood beside the plane, his eyes reflecting the spinning propellers, his lips whispering, "Welcome back, old girl." Outside, word spread through the base like wildfire. Officers and pilots came to see the miracle in aircraft once deemed scrap now alive, again under the hands of a man everyone had once dismissed. Cameras clicked, boots shuffled, but inside, the old man barely noticed. He was lost in memory, the smell of oil, the roar of engines, the sound of his crew laughing through their headsets. One afternoon, Colonel Hayes returned. He watched from afar as the team prepped the B-17 for a taxi test. William's movements were slower now. Every motion cost him effort, but every gesture was filled with precision. As the engines ignited again, the colonel leaned closer to one of his officers. "Do you hear that? That's not just a machine. That's history breathing again." The propellers spun faster, the air vibrating with power. William stepped back, wiping sweat from his face, his gaze soft and proud. The young mechanic stood beside him, no longer recruits but disciples of legacy. They had learned something no manual could teach: respect. When the engines finally shut down, the hangar was filled with a ringing silence. The colonel approached, extended his hand, and said, "You've done more than restore a plane, Mr. Carter. You've reminded us who we are." William looked at the B-17. Its nose arc glinting faintly under the fading sun. "She always knew who she was," he said with a faint smile. "We just had to listen." Chapter 7. The day she flew again. The morning of the test flight dawned clear and windless, a rare, perfect day. The air felt charged, like the sky itself was waiting. The hangar buzzed with quiet energy as technicians moved purposefully, their voices low but filled with anticipation. Outside, the massive silhouette of the restored B-17 stood proudly in the sunlight, its polished aluminum skin gleaming like liquid silver. William Carter stood by the nose of the aircraft, running his weathered hand along the cool metal. "Feels alive, doesn't she?" he murmured. The young men nodded silently, understanding the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a plane anymore, it was a resurrection. Colonel Hayes approached with two pilots, their uniforms crisp, their faces solemn. "Mr. Carter," he said, would you do us the honor of being aboard for the test taxi?" The old man's eyes widened slightly. "Aboard?" he echoed, then smiled. "It's been a long time since I sat in one of these." The colonel grinned faintly. "Then it's about time you did again." The crew helped William climb the steps. His knees ached, his breath came slow, but his hands were steady as he reached the cockpit. He sat in the co-pilot's seat, fingertips brushing the familiar levers and dials. The scent of fuel and oil filled the cabin. Stirring memories buried deep beneath years of silence. Engines roared to life one by one, the propellers slicing through the air with a sound that reached straight into the bones. The hangar doors were fully open now, sunlight spilling across the tarmac. The B-17 rolled forward slowly, majestically, like an ancient beast waking from slumber. Outside, the young airmen cheered. Cameras recorded every second, but for William, the world had narrowed to the hum of the engines and the vibration under his feet. His hands rested on the yoke, not to control, but to remember. As the aircraft gained speed, Colonel Hayes spoke over the intercom. "She's ready for flight clearance next week. But today she flies in spirit." William smiled, whispering, "She never stopped flying." When the engines shut down, there was a heavy silence. Then applause broke out across the tarmac. Tears welled in the old man's eyes. The colonel placed a hand on his shoulder and said quietly, "You brought her home, Carter." That night, as the base quieted, William stayed behind in the hangar. He sat beneath the wing, watching the moonlight glide across the metal surface. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. The B-17 had flown again, and so had he. Chapter 8. The Legacy takes flight. A week later, the sky above the base was painted in gold and silver as dawn broke. The air shimmered with anticipation. Today was the day the B-17 would truly fly again. Mechanics, officers, journalists, and families gathered along the runway. The old warbird stood ready, its engines gleaming under the morning sun. Each rivet polished like a medal of honor. William Carter stood a few paces away, dressed in a clean flight jacket for the first time in decades. The patches were faded, the fabric worn, but it still carried the scent of memory. Colonel Hayes approached with a solemn smile. "Mr. Carter," he said, "you started this. You should see it through." William chuckled softly. "No, Colonel. My time in the sky is done. But I'll be right here, watching her." The engines came alive, one by one, thunder rolling across the airfield. The propellers blurred into perfect circles of light. The crowd fell silent as the B-17 began to move. Inside, the young pilot, guided by every lesson Carter had shared, gripped the yoke with reverence. William's eyes never left the plane. His heart pounded like the rhythm of the engines. The great bird picked up speed, its wheels leaving the earth in a burst of light and power. The sound, deep, mighty, triumphant, echoed across the valley. The old man's lips parted, whispering through tears, "She's home." The aircraft soared higher, sunlight glinting off its wings, slicing through the clouds with grace. The crowd erupted into cheers, some saluting, others wiping away tears. Colonel Hayes turned to William, but the old man was still watching the sky, lost in a silence deeper than words. When the B-17 circled back, dipping its wings in salute, everyone understood it wasn't just a plane flying that morning. It was every crewman who'd ever flown with courage, every soul who'd once looked to the sky and dared to dream. As the plane touched down smoothly, the colonel clapped William on the shoulder. "You did it," he said. William smiled faintly. "No, Colonel." "We did." That night the hangar was quiet again. The B-17 rested peacefully, her wings gleaming under soft lamplight. William walked around her one last time, fingertips brushing the cool surface. Then he placed his hand over the insignia on her side, the same emblem he'd once worn into battle, and whispered, "Keep flying." He turned off the lights and stepped out into the night. the sound of the wind carrying faint echoes of engines long gone, yet somehow still alive.